If you're the type of person who enjoys Montelli versus Facilias, Primus, action conflicts, political intrigue, and characters that are actually fighting over ideas instead of just punching some godlike being in space, you probably loved the first half of Lucilla's story. I know I did. And after 3 back-to-back tragic stories with depressing endings, seeing Lucilla exhausted at her desk almost felt therapeutic. It was like I was her for a second, you know? And the comedy was refreshing. The story finally let itself breathe a little bit, you know? But then that investor call happened. And I mean, it's not as exciting as fighting Aleph 1 as an extra strider or, you know, trying to defeat the Grand Architect. But honestly, it just felt more real because most people are not like, you cannot conceptualize actually fighting something nowadays, can you? But a board meeting that's trying to shut down your institution, that's a little more believable. So in a weird sense, that was actually like more relatable to like real life. So, you know, it felt like I had something at stake at this point. Anyways, credit where it's due. The devs listened, at least the writers did, because almost every major Academy character got meaningful screen time because they lived there. The Academy's future affected them, so they were actually involved in the story. Like older stories usually needed something like, you know, the Grand Architect, ending of the world, a beatdown, a big showdown to get everybody together. But this time it was a bit more organic. It was like the characters were there because they had a connection there, they had a reason to be there, and they showed up. I mean, aside from a little jump scare. Even little things like, you know, Verena and Encore being mentioned, it just made it feel more connected, and I have really high hopes that Kuro is actually bringing back at least the old characters, and they're starting with like standard characters. Anyways, for once, you know, they weren't being thrown into a vault and being forgotten. The opening comedy was great, and then I love the Amit scene as well, the one where she showed up and then just started talking. I really wish we had more of like that father-daughter dynamic when Alto arrived, and you know, she was right there, and then we talked more about it. But honestly, I'm really happy that we got something there, and it was really good. And then the story kind of like started talking about sentiment, specifically the line like sentiments alone won't change this, and that is when my expectations just exploded through the roof, because now we're actually talking like factions, you know, power, leverage, like institutions, right? We're talking about solving a problem that cannot just be punched or, you know, power of friendship out of there. And I honestly love these kind of stories. Now Lucilla has always been suspicious to me because she's hidden a lot of things from what I can tell. She knows a lot and she feels like she's keeping Rover at arm's length at all times, you know, just pushing him away by saying he's a student while also kind of knowing his importance. And I think it's a good thing because, but then again, there's so many questions that have been unanswered, like who was on the call with her in the beginning? Who was the board director her mother? Why did her parents not want her to become a resonator? Why did she try to resign? Why was she rejected her resignation? Can you even do that? How does she command Hiyuki? Like, why does she need the flaming Miko to protect against New Federation when New Federation controls the whole board? So in a sense, New Federation literally controls everything, and they don't like her, but she's still there. Anyways, the mysteries are pretty interesting, and not knowing isn't exactly a problem because, you know, the problems are a potential. Like those problems being explored themselves could be amazing. And the thing is, I think like Lucilla could have been a terrifying character. Like she could run networks of students across like different institutions, like in Black Shores, you know, in Jinzo, maybe with the Primus, right, in the Order. And then like she receives gifts from these students, which are like so-called gifts, but they're in fact like memories. So basically they debrief in front of those objects and then they give it to her. And she gathers information that way, things she shouldn't really know. You know, maybe she could be something who's playing as, you know, working against the New Federation, maybe working with them. She's playing both sides. You know, a completely different character, like behind closed doors, because this whole time we have just gotten that she's a friendly neighborhood professor, right? And maybe that's just my imagination, but the setup was there. It was there. And that is why it's kind of disappointed me near the end, because the story like spent so many hours trying to build like this, you know, factions thing, like leaders and leverages, right? All of that. And in the very end, it solved it through sentiment, all right? And that's kind of where it lost me, because like, for one, the board meeting was really strange. Why are all the synchronists in the room for such an important decision? Like maybe, yeah, the Space Trek Collective is, you know, like a public institution, so maybe the board meeting is like one of those shows where the public can attend, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it, especially when New Federation's controlling everything, right? And there's like what, couple members that just delegate their vote to that member. Anyways, but like when a layoff is happening in real life, the people who are getting laid off usually don't get to sit on the table to vote at it, you know? Because, you know, some people have like really huge stakes and those votes could affect them, and then, you know, they could do something really intense. Anyways, and then there's Rover, who honestly, he didn't really matter because he followed her around. He watched some memories, asked a few difficult questions, you know, gave her 2 lessons apparently, and then he delivered a speech, which wasn't that great, to be honest. And the problem is that the story just kept presenting solutions that were more interesting than the one it chose. Like, it even talks about leverage and how Rover could like use leverage, but then Rover says leverage cannot be abused because people are going to hold you to that standard later on, right? And if, let's say, Lucilla does something really bad because he doesn't know her yet, well, it kind of falls the blame on him and Black Shores, and they owe New Fed one and they may have to do something for the New Fed. Anyways, the board actually like presented really good points, right? And honestly, the conflict was like set up as a clash of interest, but the resolution was really bad. I believe in the academy. Now, don't get me wrong, the speech worked, alright? I'm a human and I got goosebumps, right? The music kicked in, the emotions landed, but at the same time, I just couldn't stop thinking, you know? This was exactly the moment when Wuthering Waves could have literally overtaken so many storyline gachas. Because this was a story where we should have been playing chess. We don't really have that story in Wuthering Waves yet, you know? We don't have strategic stories. We have more like, you know, we figured this out, unraveling a mystery, fighting something, but you don't actually have the factions that have been set up for so long. It wasn't about giving speeches, you know, and the debates were genuinely interesting. Like, I honestly think they were super good. The synchronists, right, point out that the field experiment still pushed humanity forward, which is basically scraps that helped Jinzo with the retroactive ring. And that's true, but then the board then pointed out that maybe it was general education that synchronists get that did it because it wasn't actually part of the synchronous program. So in that sense, shouldn't everyone just increase the funding for basic general education? Why do we need synchronists specifically? And then the board then says, well, I mean, it's established that the academy consumes like enormous amounts of resources, especially the Rebel College, but neither side is like completely wrong, which is why the conflict was pretty compelling, right? And from the board's perspective, just think about it, like, without being in Rover's, you invest heavily into a program, right? Like 2/3 of the funding of this program goes towards controlling a giant mech that protects civilization, okay? And then the mech is gone. The threat is gone. Now the justification is gone. So naturally, they're asking, do we need this college anymore? What if we just give it to the other college, right? And it's not an unreasonable question. If a problem disappeared in your life, right, like completely, let me think of a good example for this. Okay, let's say every month you buy new gloves to wear because it's winter, but then summer came around. You can stash your gloves back, right? And you don't have to buy a new glove every, let's say, month because they tear apart. So then you could actually use the budget of buying those gloves into something else, maybe socks or other pieces of clothing, without throwing the gloves away completely. Anyways, I wanted more politics, I wanted more negotiation, I wanted more manipulation, just more strategy. It could have been that Lucilla secures funding elsewhere. Maybe Black Shores does get involved. Maybe the Montelli family gets involved. Maybe her own family that's been hinted gets involved. Maybe she has to sacrifice something to do it. Maybe she has to make compromises with her mother or whoever she was on the call with. And maybe she loses. Maybe she loses. Come on, guys. And honestly, I think a bittersweet ending would have been stronger. Because that is not like a death of a character, you know? We've been getting plenty of like hinted deaths of characters. But this one would have been a death of a dream. And the academy changes and the old vision dies. But then they could say, well, even if one dream dies, there can be another. It's not like once you stop dreaming one dream, you stop seeing dreams at all. You could see another dream. All those students could go to different colleges. You know, they could maybe find funding in their own way and make things work. I think a story about accepting that memories fade, dreams fade, but then they evolve and change. But instead, we got like a big story, you know, a big victory story, which honestly I don't even understand. Because I mean, sure, you could say that these people can use their resonance ability to go through a lot of, well, they can go through the Etheric Sea with like a spaceship, right? But then the question is, how many spaceships can you produce? How many of them are even viable to ride those ships? Do you even have a working prototype that can work that way? So then why don't we just select the elites, which Rebel College always was? So then we could always cut out, let's say, like 50%, and then the resource funding would be drastically lower. Honestly, I would just wanted to make And this wasn't like some huge thing where they had to kill off a character. This was just a simple, some NPC students get removed from the college and that's really it. Or like relocated. So they had a lot of potential there. And I did enjoy the story, of course. Like it wasn't a bad story, honestly. It wasn't as heavy, but I think this was perfectly light enough that, I liked it. And it could have, set up for the next region really well because I'm pretty sure the next region is coming soon. Anyways, I just kind of have feeling that her story had so much more potential. And maybe they'll expand on this later on. But I think this was a really great moment to keep that 3.0 hype going. Anyways, what are your thoughts on this?